everybody, welcome to You Matter, Intimate Partner Violence. Thank you so much for joining us today. I see some of you on. I really appreciate it. I have a fabulous guest today. But just to remind everyone what You Matter is about, You Matter is a platform for individuals to come to find information if you're a victim of domestic violence, intimate partner violence. And we try really hard to bring you resources to help people to move to a safe, happy, and healthy life. And we've done some interviews, and today I am thrilled to have on an attorney, and we have Melissa Cohen. And Melissa, I'm going to have her talk in just a second, but just to give you a little background, Melissa she has handled a lot of divorces. I'll let her talk more about that. But today we're really going to also focus on divorce and domestic violence and what that's like for people. So, and Melissa, you're so generous with your time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here today.
Oh, you're welcome.
Sorry about the interesting start. That was clearly my fault.
Everything in life is a lesson. And like I said to you on the phone,
right.
You know what? We're so good and laid back about these things. And I certainly think also having raised children, we're both single moms.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, whatever, what's the big deal?
As I can see some of my favorite single moms logging on right now.
Ah, hello, single moms. Thanks for being here. I know. We kind of have our own language. And then also, but we're here to talk about divorce and domestic violence. And so, Melissa, would you tell everyone on the stream right now a little bit about your background?
Sure. So everyone knows we're focusing on what happens in New Jersey, first of all, right? We're going to talk about that. So I am a family lawyer in New Jersey. I've been practicing, it will be 20 years this year that I was sworn into the bar in New Jersey. Thank you. I know. And I went to Seton Hall Law School, as did so many of us here in New Jersey who practice law. And I clerked in family court in Paterson for the presiding judge in family division for a year. And then I have been in private practice ever since. So this will be my 19th year in private practice. And I'm practicing exclusively in family law, all aspects of family law.
It must be tough, family law, I would imagine. It gets so personal.
I think we have times where I can see one of my favorite family lawyers logged in there from California, and we commiserate about the times that are hard, and then we share about the times where we have those, victories or where we've done something for somebody where it really matters, and that feeling we thought when we went into this business that we would feel all the time probably. But we do still have those moments where we, really feel like we make a difference in our clients' lives.
And that's what keeps you going. And thank goodness there's people like you and your colleagues that are on right now, also that are listening, and thank you, that are strong enough to be able to do that, because that must be difficult. But so, as for divorce, how many of these cases that involve domestic violence? Is it common?
I think that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to assess if it's common. I think it's probably more common than people who have not experienced the system would know. But as far as divorce, as a whole, no, it doesn't happen in every divorce case. And then it happens in other cases where there's not a divorce, right? So we certainly represent people who were not married, and there is a domestic violence issue as well. So, under the statute, there has to be a relationship, and it's not just a marriage, it could be a dating relationship, a prior dating relationship, or people who have child in common, that kind of thing. So not everybody who has a domestic violence situation is married. But often they do come into the context of a divorce. We often see a case start with a domestic violence incident and then parlay into a divorce, immediately thereafter, right? There's an incident, it happens, whether it leads to a final restraining order or not. We know that people can't live together after the incident, and so often a divorce ensues if the parties were married.
Thank you so much for bringing up that it might not be people that are married, but all the instances that you mentioned, have a child together, live together, don't live together, because it is, I do really discuss intimate partner violence.
Correct.
And then, of course, maybe being married and getting a divorce is better than not being married and getting and having to split up or get away. That is not for me to say. I don't know. Sometimes I think that if you have a legal binding contract, like a marriage certificate, maybe getting child support could be easier. I'm not really sure.
You know, it's interesting. We talk about that a lot. The court still, at least in New Jersey, as we're going to probably say a couple of times, we're just talking about what happens in New Jersey. In
Yes.
New Jersey, the court has two little different divisions for people who were married and people who weren't married. We have a lot of people these days who, you know, have a family to split up and children to deal with custody of and support issues who just aren't married. And we have a lot of those cases. They're actually becoming more and more frequent as the studies show that in the younger set, marriage becomes more and more obsolete over time, and that as the demographic changes and you know, you look at the younger ages, then there are less marriages per se. So we do have a lot of that, but the court treats them a little differently. Yes, you can easily go into court and get custody issues addressed and child support issues addressed if you're not married. It's just a little bit different than if there's a divorce.
Okay. Okay. And yeah. And of course, not to mention the underlying feelings of retaliation, how terrified the person who is trying to get away from this abusive situation is. And that, of course, we've talked about on this channel before. That is absolutely something that, of course, you're also dealing with the emotional side of a client as well.
Right. They talk a lot about that, about this cycle of domestic violence. And so there's always this, if you have a trial, there's always the question that comes on when you're defending a domestic violence restraining order and say, well, you never went to the police before and you never went to the hospital before. And so as if that wears away at the validity of their argument. But the studies do show that when you look at the true cycle of domestic violence, that many people who are a real true victim don't come forward. Or you see a lot of what they do is they come into court, they get the temporary restraining order. And then before they get to a final hearing, they dismiss it. And a lot of times you find with the true victims, maybe if they eventually get a final restraining order, they've gone through that process many times. The almost being able to do it, the starting to do it, and then not being able to bring it to, you know, conclusion and going back to the abusive spouse or partner. There is a lot of that. So the studies show when you look at the true cycle that's very common.
Yes, it is very, very hard to end that cycle. And I do think the fear of retaliation, you know, maybe it's just better if I just go back.
There's a lot of control.
A lot of control, a lot of emotional.
And financial. Really, when we look at this, you know, when they look at the whole thing and not just the pieces of it, often we see it's the financial control, maybe even more so than the physical abuse. Because the people who are truly physically abused, at least in my private practice, less common to see.
Less common.
Less common. The true physical assaults, less common. Than you would see. I don't know if any of the family lawyers who are on here agree, but it's really more of that element of control, right? And so if you're a victim and you've been abused and you don't work, you haven't worked, or you're home and you've been raising children, right? The financial control, we see that a lot.
Something I certainly experienced was a lot of financial abuse. Right. And I at that time I didn't work, but and even if you do, and in New Jersey, who can make it on one salary? So yes,
very
April,
true.
Thank you. April agrees. Yes,
April practices family law in California.
Oh, in California.
In LA.
Well, April, you know, maybe we have a future interview with you too, because I do know that there's people who follow us on You Matter that are in California. So getting this information out, it is so important. So a court order can be attained if there is a threat, or have there been cases of physical violence and sexual assault? In your opinion, how many victims really go forward with that, you know?
That's hard for me to say. I don't know that I've ever seen statistics on how many people come in on a temporary and don't go forward with a final restraining order. A lot of times what we do, well, maybe we should talk about that, what the difference is. So in New Jersey, if there's an incident of domestic violence, right, there has to be an incident. There has to be an act. There has to be one event that happened. You can obtain a temporary restraining order either by calling the police and getting one through the police department, who then brings you before the court in that municipality to get a restraining order, or you can go down to your county courthouse Every county courthouse in New Jersey has a domestic violence unit, and they have wonderful special people who work there who are trained to intake your story, talk to you about what happened, fill out the temporary, and then they bring you before a judge in Superior Court. A lot of people do that if it's between the 8:30 and 4:30 court hours. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of the times where you get one to the police is because often these things happen at night,
Yes.
right, when the courthouse is closed. So you can do one of two things. So that's our system here in New Jersey. The temporary just puts a Band-Aid on the situation. It puts the people in two separate places, right, to diffuse the situation. And as the statute goes, everybody's supposed to come back into court within 10 days for a final restraining order hearing. During COVID, the 10-day rule is a challenge
Yeah.
because, right, we're trying all these cases from home, and we still are, at least in all the counties where I practice. And so it's a two-step process. You get the temporary, and then you have a final hearing where you have to prove your case before a judge in the Superior Court. So I don't know if I've seen statistics on how many people get the temporary and dismiss it. A lot of the dismissals are because if there's a corresponding divorce, we will try to work out a civil order where the
Mm-hmm.
parties agree to stay away from each other, will live in separate and apart, and are restrained from contact.
And everything you just said, what I really love what you said is the wonderful people at the courthouse. Because as a victim of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, you're so terrified to go to authorities. And I know that, and I'm just going to say it, but I hear from people that work with domestic violence victims and intimate partner violence victims, sometimes the police aren't helpful. Sometimes they make it worse. And I'm not bashing the police at all, but this is just what people have told me. And also victims have told me this.
That would be a whole nother topic of
Whole nother topic, a
of
whole nother topic.
conversation that I'm not sure. They're trained. I will say this. The police officers are trained. They're
Yeah,
specially trained in domestic violence, and I have seen some absolutely amazing, wonderful, wonderful police officers
always,
as
right?
witnesses I've had in restraining order situations where I have to have them come to court, and they've been very thorough and review the situation. And so that is true. And as a matter of fact, on the flip, I had I defended a restraining order a couple of months ago where I represented the gentleman, and he had clearly not done it. And he was falsely accused, and the police were a wonderful witness for him in that regard. But I would say that the training of the people who work in the courthouse is different. For the police, they're obviously dealing with other things as well. The people who work the domestic violence unit at the courthouses, they are trained to just do that.
Yeah, and again, I'm not bashing police at all. And see, now that story you just said about the gentleman that was accused of domestic violence and it wasn't true.
Right. We've talked about that, right?
Right. The individual who pressed those charges sort of damages it for the people that need it the most.
Right. You
So
and I had a conversation about that offline, right? So
we did.
that's a really big problem, and why I guess maybe when you're a young lawyer, you think, oh, I'll only, represent people who are victims. But really, first of all, that doesn't become a reality when you're in private practice, of course. But
Right.
really, for the system to work, it has to work both ways. We have to make sure people are getting the protections that are afforded to them under the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act. And we have to make sure people are not abusing the protections that are set forth in the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act. Because when people are falsely accused, or people are using the domestic violence system to gain an advantage in their divorce, which we see a lot, it's like the boy that cried wolf, right? It whittles down the protections for the people who truly need it. And if you're a judge who hears exclusively domestic violence cases and 15 cases before you a day, and you have 10 cases of these, ones that are BS,
Right.
it might make you miss somebody who's a true victim, because if you're, hearing that many cases a day and so many people are either lying or stretching the truth or seeking protection that they're not really entitled to, it really whittles away at the protection that real victims need. And so,
No, and judges are human too. It's a huge responsibility to be a judge.
it's a huge responsibility, definitely.
Huge responsibility, because you really, judges so often have that decision. I remember years ago, a friend of mine got divorced, and it did have to go. A lot of the deciding factors of their divorce decree were in front of a judge in one day. And it must be a huge responsibility for a judge. So, and there's always going to be those people that take advantage of the system on either side, always. So for them
Right.
to have to weed through and disseminate all of that information instantly, because a lot of times I've noticed judges really have to act instantly in many cases.
They do, especially in family court. There's no jury, right? So it's all on the judge. It's all on the judge.
Tremendously,
Right. And
tremendously.
right. And they don't ever want to
Intimidating.
be the judge, as we all know, probably in every state there's a story or two like this, but no one wants to be the judge who denied a restraining order and then somebody is injured. I know there was a case in Bergen County many, many years ago where there was a restraining order that was denied and then there was a murder.
Oof.
Right. I mean, and as they say, if somebody is really at that point where a murder will be committed, probably a restraining order wouldn't stop somebody if they
Mhm.
are already at that past that point of, rational cognitive thought.
That's
But
right.
no
Piece of
one wants
paper
to,
isn't.
right. People always say that, but no one wants to be the judge that happens to. So I think that's another thing that makes their job hard.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And if you are really dealing with somebody that's psychotic, a piece of paper saying, "Oh, you have to stay away from this
Right.
person," or it isn't going to be the case.
Right.
So that's really unfortunate. So we also discussed a little bit on offline too, a little bit about cases of just talking a little bit more. We touched on a little bit about maybe in a heterosexual relationship. Where have you ever seen any cases where you did have that one case where there was someone accused of committing domestic violence, but have you ever had a case where in a heterosexual relationship where a man was truly the victim of domestic violence?
It was interesting. She did ask me that the other day, and I tried to remember. I'm sure it's happened over the years, but I do not have a case where that sticks out in my mind. I definitely have never seen an assault go that way. That is not to say that that doesn't happen. Maybe it's a reporting issue. Maybe males in a heterosexual relationship don't report that type of abuse or take it seriously. What we often see with the heterosexual relationships is people getting cross complaints.
Mm.
So I've gotten, often there's this incident, whether it rises to the level of domestic violence where a restraining order is needed or not. There's often the incident, whether it's that last fight that ends a marriage or, people are drinking and something happens in the homes, something like that. Oh, good. One of my very close friends is chiming in from Minnesota saying she has represented males. Or maybe she can tell us more about that in the comments. But often there's a cross complaint situation, where there was a fight, and that's what I see with the males. There are both, right? And I have seen that in my own practice where there was, allegations. Of course, we're never there. So allegations of physical abuse by both against each other.
Oh,
And I would say that's more frequent.
more frequent.
More frequent.
I mean, I do know a couple, they weren't married and it was a heterosexual relationship, and he was physically abused by his partner and did not report anything. He was humiliated, but he wouldn't fight back. He said he just sort of cowered in the corner and thought, if I don't move, it'll end faster.
Right. I think that's probably a common thought for a male in a heterosexual relationship to probably, have a hard time coming forward because maybe there's a stigma going that way.
Oh, absolutely. And then we have a whole nother discussion about societal norms, the roles, these roles, which we like. I'm glad to see that things are loosening up a little bit. I mean, you talked about how people are deciding necessarily not to get married. The institution of marriage is certainly, the marriages have decreased. I just read an article this morning how millennials and Gen Zs are really not joining religious institutions anymore.
Right.
The percentages drop. So sort of the institutions of marriage, the institutions of religions they're really being looked at very differently. And probably because of boomer parents like myself, they're taking a look at them, not even at a conscious level, maybe an unconscious level, saying, well, I'm not doing it that way.
I think it's a lot of things. I mean, it used to be obviously, right, 100 years ago, having a baby out of wedlock, right? Instant societal ostracization, right? Okay. But now what happens, and we always joke, right? Society happens and then the law catches up, right? So
I
what
like that.
happens, right? So in Hollywood, right, you see the
Yes.
Brad and Angelinas, although they did eventually get married, but people having babies before they're married, having babies without being married, and or long-term relationships, like the Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell, all
Yes.
those years, being together but not being married. And when people see that type of, represent, well, they always say, right, you can't be it if you don't see it, right? So they see representations of that and see that's another way to achieve a family, and right, and then the law sort of catches up.
Yes, I've even seen, I know a couple that they both wanted a child. They weren't necessarily in love. They were in their upper 30s and they decided to have a child together and co-parent, but not live together. And they weren't in love, but they're actually wonderful parents.
Right,
And
who's
the
to
child is
say?
thriving.
Right, who's to say what type of family is better, for a child than anyone else, right? So a family is what works for you, and it's nice to have the freedom to create that if that's what you want.
We have a comment here. Someone saying that their clients that have been immigrant males abused by their U.S. citizen spouse mentally and physically. Thank you so much for that
This is
comment.
yeah, this is my lovely friend Tamara. She is a immigration attorney extraordinaire in Minnesota. She's extremely involved in her local bar, and that's a very interesting perspective, is what she's saying. So and she's seeing them come forward, which is good.
That is fabulous, and thank you so much for saying that. I see you said Tamara.
Yep.
Ah, that's my name. My mother was from the Midwest, so she pronounced it Tamara. But it is really, yes, I mean, most people know it as Tamara. And then we also talked a little bit about same-sex couples.
Yes.
And of course, now same-sex couples can still, right? They can still be married. I know that for a time there, we weren't sure what was going to happen. But have you seen cases? Have you ever dealt with cases of divorce, or not even divorce, of a domestic violence or an intimate partner violence situation?
Yeah. I definitely. I mean, in New Jersey, I mean, listen, we're lucky to be in a state like New Jersey, who probably long since recognized these rights.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there's always been in New Jersey, for as long as I've been practicing, a way for people, no difference between the heterosexual and homosexual relationships. Um, as far as the domestic violence laws were concerned, I've never seen a problem, anything like that.
Okay, and I'm curious. Is it more? I'm looking at really sort of what we would say traditional homosexual relationships, where there's men and women, and now we have certainly many different genders that are recognized. But if I'm just looking at the male, female,
Right.
do you notice that there's on the male side or female side? Is there one side that's abused, or there's abuse, physical abuse, or mental, emotional, financial abuses? Sexual abuse? You don't
No,
know?
no, I've not noticed any difference. No.
Yeah. I was just curious about that, because of the patterns of abuse, and because we do traditionally think of a man abusing a woman. And I was curious if, and men tend to get, I mean, I grew up with three brothers. There was always a hole in the wall. They were always wrestling, and it wasn't even like they were just wrestling. It wasn't like they were just beating each other up. An elbow went through the wall,
Right.
you know. And then sometimes it would escalate, and I'd get mad, and then one of them would punch, and there'd be a hole in the wall. So I just was wondering, because men are, I noticed even as little boys, and just having, I do have as far as I know, heterosexual children. My son was always so physical, and the girls would sit more, and play. But it was interesting. So that sometimes and I don't mean to sound like I'm not, certainly I know there's many different genders now, and we absolutely honor that, but just looking at the traditional role. So I didn't know if that maybe was a part of it.
Another thing that
That was,
I've noticed coming through my practice, I mean, of course, it always remember, I mean, I'm in private practice, so
mhm.
there could be a lot that, I don't have, my finger on the pulse of. If that type
Mhm.
of case type isn't coming in to the office, then I wouldn't have as much experience with that. But no, I mean, at least how you're going to be treated by the court in New Jersey, you are not going to be treated any differently. We're lucky that we live in a state that has laws that are, gender neutral and protect everybody. So no, I can't say I would notice any difference in how they were treated.
Certainly not like maybe some of the states in the South. I
I would
certainly
imagine, right?
Alabama is a very conservative state, and I don't know the laws in Alabama, but I know that I don't even know if a woman can get an abortion in Alabama.
As I said, we're lucky to
Yeah,
live
right,
where we do, right?
right. More access to that. Um, so, you know, if someone is really wants to divorce an abuser, what is the least intimidating, safest, least scariest way? What is maybe a first step they could take?
I think there are a few good first steps that someone could take. Obviously, having a consultation with a family lawyer helps. A lot of people come in for a consultation. They don't get divorced for, a year, several years. We've had people come back 10 years later after their initial consultation. Always good to have that first consultation so you can start to understand what your rights are. I think we always say the hardest part is walking in the door the first time, or getting on the Zoom, right? Nowadays, no one's walking through anybody's door, but
Right.
right. But that's the hardest part. The hardest part is people who are home thinking they don't have any rights, or when there's right, the financial abuse, specifically thinking I could never do this. And then once you see an attorney, for most people, they walk out leaving, oh, yes, I can do this. Yes, I can do this. Or these are the steps I might have to take in order to do it, whether it's you've never worked and maybe you should start getting yourself, back into the workforce to prepare yourself for an eventual divorce, or whether it's learning that you have to gather financial information that you never made yourself privy to during the marriage. We see that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Telling people, look for the tax returns, call the accountant, start pulling the bank statements, and people, go through their whole marriages and they never do that. So that would be one step. Obviously, the other step, I know all my attorneys are going to pipe in here, is therapy, therapy, therapy,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the amount of people we see, always we say this, right? There's two types of people, those who are in therapy and those who should be in therapy, right? That's especially true of our practice, to go through a divorce and not have the therapy piece in place, or to be a victim, or to assess whether you're a victim. I mean, you really need that therapy component in place. Or look for people who have a program, right? Like you do, support, help. We have county run programs, domestic violence shelters, domestic violence support groups. We start there.
A wonderful organization for people in New Jersey. For actually, they help everyone. They don't just help women, even though the name gives it away. The Women's Rights Information Center in Englewood, New Jersey, will help anyone. And that is a wonderful resource. And a lot of the resources, I think every resource, at least the help they give you, is free. Where you end up going, there may be a cost.
Of
But
course.
if you're not able to pay for something, they may know something. So I did actually have Vidalia Acevedo, who is a victim's rights advocate,
Exactly.
on this interview is on Instagram, on YouTube. It is a wonderful, wonderful resource for people. And that might be also, so making the appointment with the attorney, just making the
Just
appointment,
making the
just
appointment.
just go see.
Right.
You're not going to say to them, well, you've got to go to court now and get this divorce.
No,
Nothing like
never.
that.
We don't do
Never.
that. Attorneys, I
No.
know, right? They don't do that. Attorneys tell you what your rights are, but no good attorney is then going to be on you to file for divorce or do anything. We're just there to provide information or to put you in touch with the right people so you can make your own decision, on your own. But in Bergen County is also like alternatives to domestic violence, right? They
Mhm.
are there, over in Hackensack, and they provide those kind of resources. And a lot of times that helps. That helps, right? So you meet people who are in your similar situation, helps give people the strength they need to move forward, or maybe to, assess if they're a victim as far as the law would define it.
Mhm. And there are such fabulous resources just in Bergen County. And if they're in Bergen County, I'm sure there are a lot of places. So yes, the Women's Rights Information Center. And you mentioned that if someone has been a stay-at-home mom or dad, and you say, well, maybe they do need to get a job so they can start earning an income. There are so many resources out there. I know, for example, Family Promise in Ridgewood,
Mm-hmm.
the Women's Rights Information Center, Bergen Community College. That's actually where I work. there are so many areas of workforce development and people that can help you. And I will tell you, there are so many jobs out there right now
Oh,
that
really? Seeing
there
that?
are so many jobs, and people are having a really difficult time finding people to work. So if you are in a position where you do need a job because maybe you're married and your spouse has a job, so you don't qualify for unemployment, and I don't want to get tricky in that. And also I should mention for through the unemployment office, just while we're on the topic, there is also the displaced homemakers.
Correct.
So if you are right, if you are a woman, you can go to the displaced homemakers and through the job center through the unemployment office. And I don't even know if you have to be collecting unemployment.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. But like you said, Melissa, so important. Make the appointment with the attorney. Make the appointment at one of the centers that can help you. And even though, again, I really want to stress this, the Women's Rights Information Center has the word women in it, but they'll help anyone, anyone.
Right. Sometimes it just takes finding someone else in your same boat to give you the strength to do something, or the opposite. It meeting one other person in a similar situation might help you, assess if domestic violence is what is happening.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because as we talked about offline, not every abuse rises to the level of what the court would consider domestic violence as a term of art sufficient to give a final restraining order. So those things can be different, right? There can be some harassment going on and things like that, but a court may not find it actionable. And so that's sort of where the attorney comes in to help you sort of address that.
So counselors, all these several nonprofits, making an appointment with your attorney, assess your situation. Or I also know there's a lot of victims out there that are victims of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. But we said this before, they don't know that they are. They're sort of programmed to believe
For sure.
it's not.
It's their norm, right? We often, see cases where, it's been going on for years. And when you really get into it with the clients and you start to unravel it, and they just say, first of all, they're not inclined to talk to their friends about what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they don't want people to know, or they're trying to conceal it, so they're protecting their kids. And they don't realize how bad it is until they get out and start to unravel the years of what was going on. I mean, not everybody has that explosive incident where there's an assault, the police come, there's an immediate temporary restraining order due to the assault, as well as criminal charges, right? An arrest for the assault. Not every case is that cut and dry. For a lot of people, it is the constant harassing messages, harassing calls, or we see a lot of the stalking is right with the GPS devices. There's a lot of people who come to us where there's a lot of the social media aspect, and that's one of the predicate acts for domestic violence in the state of New Jersey is the cyber harassment, right? Whether there's pictures posted online in retaliation, we see that Facebook messages or Facebook posts that harass. There's not just the one assault triggering event. There can be a pattern, and that's, if you read the Prevention of Domestic Violence statute, that's what they say they look for, a pattern of domestic violence over time. So some of it is in your face, and some of it is more subversive. You have to.
I'm thinking, my mother always said, never put anything in writing. So if you are someone,
as will all the attorneys on there go, yes, that's what we tell everybody. Right.
So if you're someone that is posting abusive things, there's the proof. I mean, I guess abusers get to a point. A lot of abusers are really manipulative.
They don't think. I mean, they're so used to the power that they have through it. They don't think about, the consequences of it. But yeah, I mean, you would be amazed. You'd be amazed when people put the stupidity, or people put in texts. People post.
Oh, I know.
Right. But I mean, listen, those are the easier cases for us, right?
Right.
Right. Okay.
Case closed. You're guilty. Right. I mean, I know from my own intimate partner violence situation, I had a very smart abuser, and I don't think he ever would have thought he knew ahead of time, you're not going to put anything in writing. So it was very much behind closed doors privately. So that's something that is, there might be other people out there that are experiencing that as well. Certainly it would have
Definitely.
made things, it was, my situation was long ago, but certainly would have been a lot easier if there was text messages. It would have been like, bingo.
Right. Right.
I would have been like, thank you. You
Right.
just made everything so much easier for
Easier
me.
for you, right? No, I
Right.
mean, we see that a lot. A lot of the, I think the last time I looked at the statistics, which was recent as I was prepping, the state police put out domestic violence statistics after each year that completes. And I know that at least in the last 2 years for which they have statistics, assault and harassment are the two number one basis, predicate acts, they call it in the state of New Jersey, to get a restraining order. And so the assault is obviously, right, we can see it on its face, usually the assault. But the harassment does usually come in the form of multiple text messages, multiple and repeated calls. The statute references, annoyance, alarm, repeated contact, foul language, and things like that. And so that's where we see the 100 missed phone calls on the cell phone. If you're an attorney, that's what you're looking for as far as evidence is concerned. And the 1,000 text messages through the night, or we've had the slash tires or notes on the car, or things like that. And
That's the
that's the
low
kind
hanging
of,
fruit, right?
right, that's the low hanging fruit, but that is the kind of thing you mostly see for the harassment, I would say, right? And that and the foul language included in the messages. That's what we usually see with harassment.
And so many cases, I'm sure, are so individualized. I know certainly sexual assault and rape and those things are also extremely, maybe very private and hard to prove.
If that is a problem for the court, of course, they have to assess the credibility. So when it's a he said, she said, especially in the harassment cases, right? Because the other things, or terroristic threats is another, one of the predicate acts in New Jersey. And a lot of times you see those things together, harassment and terroristic threats, because the harassment will be the foul language and the calls and the text, and then the terroristic threats, the threat, I'll kill you. I'll bury you. If you do this, X will happen to you. That's where the terroristic threats come in. So you do see that. And those can be hard, right? Who wants to be the judge in that situation where it's
Right.
just two people testifying and there's no witnesses, and it's just two people testifying about what happened in the privacy of their home?
Very difficult.
Very
We have a
difficult.
comment here I'd like to read. Irina, thank you so much. And I know she is from Ireland. She lives in Ireland, and which is wonderful. We have people on from Ireland. Isn't that amazing?
And it's cool that they can tell us what happens in other places.
Right. And she says she's calling it, she says she got her safety order because the judge had enough evidence of harassment and gaslighting. So that was fortunate for you, Irina, I suppose. That was that you
Very.
had that evidence there. Thank goodness. And they call it a safety order, where we call it a restraining order.
Right. Orders of protection, I know they call it in other places.
Orders of protection. In the UK, they always have. I always love the way they say things. Safety order.
Smart.
It's always. It's yeah. It always has almost a comforting. A very
Right.
comforting sign. Also, they say instead of saying places like orphanages or whatever they had in the old days, they call them care homes,
Right.
which we know a lot of abuse happened in care homes and certainly other places, but it was just such a different way of saying things. So I appreciate that comment, Irina. Thank you so much. And the one thing that you and I talked about, Melissa, is that we promised we wouldn't make it too long because we can
Right.
come back
That's
and do
true.
this again.
Right. We did.
And would you do me a favor? Would you let people know how they can contact you?
Oh, sure. The name of the law firm where I work is Seiden Family Law. It's in Cranford, New Jersey, 908-324-5400.
Great. Thank you so much. And what
Thank
I'm
you for
going to
having
do
me.
is, oh, of course. And what I'm going to do now is, just so the audience knows, I'm going to be posting your information in my profile.
Thank you.
Your contact information, so that when people see this, even if they've watched it later on, and there's someone that wants to contact you, they can. I want to thank everyone who joined us today. And if you are someone that is interested in coming on and telling either your own story of abuse, because you know what? It's really great for people that are in it to hear how somebody else got out.
Well, that's why the work you do is important, right? So
Thank
it
you.
comes from both sides, right? I can tell people, as I was talking about the support, I can tell people from a legal perspective what the court can do for them to protect them. Someone like you can help talk them, through it from the emotional perspective, and that is pretty much the basis of people being strong enough to do what they have to do,
Oh
right?
boy, and it's about connecting, and what you matter. What my dream for this account is to help join the victim, the either current victim, maybe even somebody that's out of it, and the resources. So resources like you, the Women's Rights Information Center. I also spoke with Lisa Swain, who's a New Jersey
Yes.
Assemblywoman. She was on. Yes, and she's put in a bill to help victims of domestic violence get extended health care.
So important.
So important.
And attorney services too, right? You were
Yes.
saying?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Also attorney services, because that's not a bill, but she's an advocate in pushing that victims can get help, because we know that the lawyers mean well and they can give pro bono, but further assistance where they're not paying for it, because I'm sure you see it
Oh,
stop a lot of times, right?
right. So, that's the hard. We're in private practice, and that means one thing. And if there are definitely people who need the help, and there's no public defenders or appointed attorneys in family court in the domestic violence area, and
Doesn't make
so
sense.
people need help. And often, right, what's, I guess, easier in the age of the internet, but to find services, right? Don't you find if it's not easy to find services for yourself, right? Don't you find that?
Yes, I
Right.
do.
And that's where someone like you comes in, because the resources. It's hard to find those services if
Learning.
you can't afford a private attorney to represent you. For some people, they don't even have access to their own money.
Well, I also really, Melissa, I want to give you a shout out, because you and I met over LinkedIn.
We did.
And I just popped the question and
Yeah,
asked if you would come on, and you said, I'd love
I'd love
to.
to. Right. This was
So
great.
that's really, I give you a lot of credit, because there's some people that just this platform isn't for them. So I really appreciate you being on, because I know there's so many people that are listening now that you've helped, and
Oh,
there's people
thank
that are
you.
going to listen to this in the future
Well,
that
thank you.
you're.
Well, I think your work is important, right? For us, we sit behind a desk and we see the attorney, we see clients who reach out to us, but for people like you can really help
Well, thank
people
you.
who really need it. So thank you.
You're welcome, and we will do it again.
All right. Let me know when.
In the meantime, enjoy your rainy
Thank you. I
Saturday.
know.
Nice
What a
Memorial
holiday
Day.
weekend. I know. All right. Take care. Thank you, everybody. And
Thank you, everyone. Have a
right.
wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.